Hello and welcome to a special emergency episode of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. We don't usually do a midweek episode, but today's a big one, an important one. The government has finally published both the curriculum and assessment review and its official response to it. So we thought that we would put together a very quick episode just to bring everybody up to speed on it. So the two documents landed together as a package this morning, and they're important because they could essentially reshape what's taught, how it's assessed, and even how schools think about curriculum design over the next few years. I'm joined, as always, by Becky, and we've got Sally returning as well. And for the first time, making her debut on this and any other podcast, I think, Lisa. We have Lisa, who is another one of our brilliant Twinkle Education content leads. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, John.
Absolute pleasure. Good to have you. So I just thought we'd start very quickly with a little bit of context. So the curriculum and assessment review was published, the Curriculum and Assessment Review was commissioned by the government back in July 2024, and Professor Becky Francis was appointed as chair to lead a panel of experts to look at what should be changed with the curriculum. And this is a review into the entire national curriculum for England, and not just for maths, but obviously we're going to focus on the maths side of things today. And it's looking right across primary, secondary, and 16 to 19 education as well. We're going to focus primarily on the primary math side of things, obviously, although to do that, we're going to have to dip into Key Stage 3 a little bit. And it also looked at the not just the curriculum, but also the assessment side of things as well. And I guess the review was commissioned because it's been over 10 years since the curriculum was last reviewed. For those of us who were teaching at the time, we remember that massive change where the government got rid of levels and moved towards this idea of age-related expectations. But over that time, there's been a little bit of a concern that maybe the curriculum as it is now isn't any longer fully fit for purpose. And the system might not be working particularly well for all learners. I think that's fair to say. Persistent attainment gaps linked to socioeconomic disadvantage and SEND, amongst other things. So the government wanted an evidence-led assessment on how to modernise the curriculum and qualifications to ensure that they remain cutting edge, inclusive and aligned with future skills such as digital literacy, oracy, financial education and sustainability. We had back in March an interim report which set out sort of the early findings. And then today, as I say, it's the 5th of November, bonfire night, and we've got the final report and the government's response to it. So I thought if it's okay with everyone, I'll just go through very quickly the key takeaways, sort of the summary points from it, and then we can just have a bit of a chat about what has stuck out to each of you and your particular areas of interest and expertise. So overall, the sort of core recommendations are essentially that we're keeping the content by the sounds of things, but very much looking to change the sequence of how it's taught. The Becky Francis, or the report at least, suggests that the content seems to be broadly acceptable. My personal opinion is that I think there's probably still a little bit too much of it, but they're happy with the content as is, but feel that there's too much too soon. And I think we probably all agree with that. So for Key Stage 1, there's going to be an even stronger focus on number fluency and number sense, something that we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. And the recommendation is that there is a priority for deep understanding of number bonds, addition and subtraction, and number composition in Key Stage 1, which really reflects what we were talking about with Michelle Windridge on Monday this week in the EYFS episode that we did of the podcast, where in reception particularly, they've really been focusing on that number fluency to 10 in recent years. So it sounds like that sort of focus is going to continue through into Key Stage 1. And to me, that's great. That's something that we've been talking about for a few years now. and I'm really pleased that that's been included. They've also mentioned making sure this fluency is included in other areas like shape and measure, which is great, that cross-curricular learning. I'll come on to assessment in a moment, but they did touch on Key Stage 1 maths tests, so we'll talk about that in a minute too. In Key Stage 2, the focus is very much on multiplicative reasoning and problem solving. There's a recognition that this is an area that Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 children and students are finding particularly difficult, and so they want to improve the foundations of that in Key Stage 2. So the idea here is that children will build competence in multiplication, division, and associated facts, and that some of the other aspects of proportionality and algebraic reasoning particularly might move into Key Stage 3, which I think is interesting. We don't have a huge amount of detail on exactly what that might look like, which aspects of proportionality or proportional reasoning might move. We've talked before about fractions and how conceptually tricky they can be. And for me, it would be great to see maybe some of the more complex side of that, things like multiplying with fractions and dividing fractions, moving into Key Stage 3 alongside scaling and those things that maybe relate slightly more to proportional reasoning. But we will wait and see on that. In terms of assessment, the government is recommending, the panel recommended, and the government is taking on board, that Key Stage 1 non-statutory test should remain and be focused more on fluency, and that the Key Stage 2 end of Year 6 test should obviously remain as well and be focused even more heavily on reasoning and problem solving to reflect the focus that they want to have in Key Stage 2 on that. Moving into Key Stage 3, they also want to introduce a new Year 8 diagnostic test to identify gaps before GCSEs. And Sally, I know you'll talk about this in a moment, but they did address the multiplication times tables check in Year 4 as well, with no indication that that's going to change particularly, other than in terms of access for children who might currently find it difficult to engage with that test for whatever reason. So quite what that looks like, I don't know, but Sally, you might have some ideas on that. I'll be interested to hear them. Also talking about financial education and how that links with citizenship, which is an area that the review was interested in pushing across primary even further. So we'll talk about that with Lisa in a moment too. But overall, I would say that message of evolution rather than revolution was very much evident in the final report, that there's nothing hugely shocking in here. And if anything, I'm slightly disappointed that it didn't go a little bit further. One thing I was pleased about, though, was the focus on reasoning and problem solving. And specifically, the report mentions that children should be stretched through access to problem solving and reasoning tasks. And not just for those children who are higher attaining, but for all children as well. And obviously, reasoning and problem solving has been a cornerstone, one of the three main principles and aims of the national curriculum for 10 years now. It's good to see that that's still being focused on. And it's definitely something we've been talking about at Twinkle in terms of making sure that's part of every lesson, really. So, Becky, might be a good place to start with you, actually, when it comes to problem solving. I know that's an area that you've been talking about and working on recently. How do you see that sort of slotting into are there any major changes, do you think, in terms of that?
Well, I think the fact that it was mentioned and mentioned often in the report is a really good sign. There's been a lot to read through today with the review and the government response, but problem solving did come up quite frequently, not just in maths either. We saw it in other areas as well, specifically DT and geography. And I think it is right that it has been mentioned that many times. I think although it is very much a fundamental part of our curriculum, I still think that's the part that we haven't quite got right yet. My slight worry is that we've talked about fluency becoming a real focus for Key Stage 1 and problem solving becoming a real focus for Key Stage 2. And my worry is that that almost adds to the idea that they are three very separate things. We have fluency, we have reasoning, we have problem solving. Whereas I think we've learned that actually the three are very much intertwined. And although you definitely do need the fluency first, that actually it's not a linear progression through the three. So my worry is that that might be exacerbated by thinking that Key Stage 1 is fluency and Key Stage 2 is problem solving. But very, very pleased to see it there. And my favourite line from the entire thing, this was the government response, actually, one sentence, which was, "Excellence in maths will provide the problem solvers of tomorrow," which I loved. It's my new tagline.
Yeah, well, it's hard to disagree with. Yeah, totally agree with you that we wouldn't want to lose problem solving, would we, from Key Stage 1? Or even from EYFS. Maths is about problem solving, isn't it? So fluency is a way to make problem solving easier, but fundamentally, if we're not doing problem solving, are we really doing maths? That's a question for another day. We should do a whole podcast on that. But I think that was interesting. I was really pleased to see, as you say, mentioned so many times across the document and the government's response to it. It's very clear that problem solving isn't going away, and yeah, that's surely right, and why we've been looking into it even more recently, Becky.
Absolutely.
So, Sally, the MTC, are you happy to talk to us about that? Obviously, you've done a lot of work on this in the last few years.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work on it in the last few years, mainly because I was a year 4 teacher trying to get children up to scratch for it. But also, yeah, with the Maths app, we have an MTC simulator.
Sorry, Sally, it does feel like that, doesn't it? A bit like the year 6 teacher feeling like the SATs is, their responsibility. Year 4 teachers do often feel like the MTC is their responsibility, but you can't do it all
when you have children,
in a few months, can you?
Yeah, when you have children coming up and they don't know their 2s, 5s and 10s, it's quite a lot of knowledge to build with the rest of the maths curriculum that you need. And also the year 4 and year 5 curriculum everything after hangs so really much on those multiplication facts, doesn't it? That if they haven't grasped them, then they really start to struggle. We introduce division.
I wonder if that is a slight concern, given that Key Stage 1 is more focused now on additive and additive relationships and addition and subtraction facts, whether multiplication is going to be pushed entirely into Key Stage 2.
Possibly.
Oh, we don't know, obviously. So the other thing we should probably say at this point, the other thing we should say at this point is that the curriculum document itself isn't due to be written yet, so nobody's writing it yet, but it won't be released until summer of 2027 and won't be expected to be taught until September 2028, so we've got plenty of time to talk and worry about this, but
I think what you're saying about the addition and subtraction facts, though, John, is that, that was in the non-statutory guidance anyway, wasn't it? That focus on getting those addition and subtraction facts to 20. And also in the new EYFS curriculum, it's like focus down on the number bonds to 10. Don't focus out too far from that, really get that concept down. So I don't think any of this is like news to us. We already knew this was the direction of travel. And then focusing on multiplicative relationships, that's what the MTC's been pushing for. I think what the difference with the what they've said about the MTC today is that it's not working for all pupils. And although it has accessibility features within it, and you can do things like different colour themes and things for children who have visual impairments, it doesn't help any children with problems with executive function. So, that pressure on the speed test, okay, we're finding out if they can answer and recall at speed, which can work for a lot of children. But for some children, that's anxiety inducing. And for some children, they just don't process that quickly. But they might be able to process if they had more time, they might know the facts. So I wonder if it's going to be something about adjustable pacing,
Yeah,
allowing
that's
more time to answer questions.
That's sort of the bit that came to my mind was for most children, the time limit is probably acceptable, but for some children, it is going to cause that anxiety, as you say. I also wonder whether is there. We know that we're moving more towards digital assessments generally. We've seen this year with the reception baseline assessment that digital element being introduced there, and there's talk about even up to GCSEs, different ways of administering tests. And obviously, the MTC has been digital since its inception. Is there an argument, do you think, for some children doing it a different way to make it more accessible?
I mean, there currently is an access arrangement where a teacher can input on it. So that arrangement is already there. So the teacher reads out and the child tells the answer. They don't actually have to input if it's a problem with the sort of digital skills or, some access arrangements that affect that. So I think that's already slightly addressed for certain individuals. I think it's the processing time, and it's also, I think in the curriculum review, it said something around executive function and allowing teachers to know what the next steps are for children. So if a child doesn't access it at all, you don't have like, oh well, they've achieved X, Y, and Z, but they need to, do A and B. You haven't got that detail, have you, of where they're going? But I guess you don't have that detail really. You don't have a readout on how the children have done. You just get a score. So maybe there's something on that, like it's more of a diagnostic assessment, so you can fill the gaps.
Yeah.
That would be more useful, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It's just it's interesting because the other test that they mentioned in the same breath as the MTC was the phonics check as well, the phonics screening check, and accessibility for that too. I guess it's just a case of waiting and seeing what that looks like. But the only thing, as you say, that for me, for the MTC, that would make it more accessible for some children probably is removing or changing that time pressure. Because if what we want to check is whether they know the fact or not, yes, we want them to be able to do it almost instantly in best case scenario, but for some children that might not be appropriate. So yeah, we will wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think part of the reason for it being brought in was we were checking, weren't we, that children were able to recall it quickly. I wonder if, and this is a logistical nightmare, but in the same way that the Key Stage 1 SATs are administered alongside the child, I think observing how children are getting to those answers might be useful too, because we're trying to avoid the idea that they're sort of maybe counting to find the answers. But if you were with them doing it, you could maybe assess that a bit better as well. As I said, a logistical nightmare, but something to consider maybe. Who knows?
Yeah,
Really
I don't know what the direction of travel with this whole thing is really around teacher, because the alongside this, the other change that was made that is obviously outside the remit of this particular podcast, but it was around teacher assessment of writing as well, and making that more robust at the end of Key Stage 2, which goes back to that idea of trusting teachers and teacher judgment and trust in the profession generally. And as you say, Becky, what does the MTC tell a teacher who knows their class already? What does it tell them that they shouldn't already know, I suppose? And so what is the purpose of it? You could argue that the purpose could be that pressure that we were talking about earlier, that actually in year 4, there really is a point where they need to know their times tables in order to be able to pass this test. And it feels a little bit like the same reason that the phonics screening check is in place. It's kind of a line in the sand that this is where they should know it. I think for the MTC, the problem falls down at the moment is what happens for those children who don't get a good score, whatever a good score might be on the MTC. What happens after that? Because at the minute, the phonics screening check, they retake it a year afterwards or a few months afterwards. With the MTC, it's sort of, okay, well, we're looking at this as a whole data set for a year group potentially or a school, but what happens to those individual children? For me, that's something that probably needs following up somehow. I'm not sure how many schools do that.
It's also what happens to those children at the end of Key Stage 1 that don't have their additive facts. How do we follow up on that? I think that's something that, maths leads need to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder whether this sort of review of the Key Stage 1 test might take that into account as well, because the line in the review is that it's going to be useful for diagnostic purposes for Key Stage 2 teachers receiving those children from Key Stage 1. So it would make sense, wouldn't it, that there was some sort of check on those additive facts at that point, because if that's what all of Key Stage 1 is gearing up towards, to making sure children have got those before they leave Key Stage 1, then that would be a sensible time to check it. But again, it's a wait and see, but it'd be good to see something like that in there, as long as it's low stakes and not being used to, for accountability, I suppose.
I wonder how many schools. Oops, sorry.
No, go on,
I wonder
Lisa.
how many schools would adopt the Key Stage 1 non-statutory SATs paper if it does include the number facts kind of test.
I think it's been a really interesting message about that, hasn't it? It's like, this is no longer statutory, so people are probably pulling back from it. Oh, we're going to keep it non-statutory, but we're encouraging you to do it. It's kind of like, okay, well, if you want people to do it, I don't know.
I mean, I know anecdotally a lot of or many trusts like their schools to use it because it's a way of having a standardized check across their Key Stage 1 settings to see, to be able to compare schools and things at a trust level. So some trusts insist that their schools do that test. Outside of that, I don't know how many schools choose to do it just for the fun of it. But we were talking, weren't we, this morning, Becky, given the fact that you work in a junior school, that where junior schools are receiving their children from an infant school, and perhaps the communication, just from a logistics point of view, isn't what it would be in a primary school where children are moving, next door from year 2 to year 3. When they're actually changing settings and moving schools, having that data would be quite useful potentially.
Yeah, I think also in an infant and junior school, you're not necessarily, although obviously we're all following the same curriculum, the methods of teaching, the approach taken could be quite different. And so I think sometimes having something standardized to draw on could be quite useful in that situation.
It was interesting. Elsewhere in the report this morning, they did say that they wanted to move towards a more specific curriculum in some cases without eroding teacher autonomy or making decisions for teachers over what was taught, which struck me as a little bit of an oxymoron. I don't know how you can do both of those things necessarily, giving teachers autonomy over what's taught but also specifying what's taught. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, I think. But as you say, maybe it is about the methods. Maybe that there's still going to be some flexibility there, but that doesn't necessarily help, as you say, when children are moving between schools, whether that's infant and junior or just moving from one school to another. Some idea of a consistency in approach might be useful. Moving on to an area that we haven't talked much about on the podcast so far, and so I'm interested to learn a little bit more about from Lisa, is financial education. And Lisa, you've been again, working on this and championing this for a little while now. So were you interested to read what was included in the report this morning on financial ed?
I was really glad to see that it was a statutory requirement. I think that's the key part that I really took from that report. And part of that is having citizenship be made a statutory subject within primary, because we know a lot of financial education was originally within the citizenship module, which is non-statutory within primary, with some of maths being embedded within that, more money-based, so recognising coins and notes. We know now, since 2014, the world's moved on. We're moving into a digitalised world. So we know the financial education that was within there was really, really outdated, and it really needed a revamp. And hopefully that's what's going to happen in this new curriculum that will be released in 2027. So hopefully it will. What we do want is to make sure that we help children develop that knowledge, that understanding, those skills that are required to navigate the wider world, to make those informed financial decisions with just that resilience and confidence. That's what ultimately I'm hoping that's going to be within that curriculum release.
I totally agree with you in so much as it's great. I think teachers have been saying for a while now, and parents have been saying for a while, and students leaving at GCSE have been saying that they would like more financial education in terms of things that would help them in the real world to understand how money works and to be able to use it responsibly and things. And in fact, actually, we were just talking before we started recording about the conversations that we have as adults about financial literacy and, just being able to pay the bills and things. Having just come back off holiday, I'm feeling that distinctly this morning. So some financial education for myself would be quite useful. Maybe one of the concerns that teachers might have, and I don't know your thoughts on this, Lisa, or anyone really, is adding in that statutory requirement for citizenship lessons is adding something else into a curriculum that is already feeling like it's bursting at the seams, and teachers are struggling to fit it all into the school day. So without wishing to extend the school day at all, how do you think that will affect how financial education is taught? Is there room to teach it, or do we need to teach it cross-curricularly with maths, or what's the best approach?
I think that what came through in the report was that horizontal coherence between citizenship and maths, and being able to play between that. Financial education goes beyond maths, it goes beyond citizenship, in my opinion. It goes into digital literacy. So you've got those elements that will be covered upon that. So hopefully in what they will say is that it's taught cross-curricular, but ensuring that the mathematical understanding is there first before we build upon that. So looking at negative numbers, understanding that before you look into overdrafts. So like I said, it's really important that the key understanding is there before you build upon the financial education element within there. But hopefully there is going to be conversations within everyday life, like you've just had with Becky, about bills you have to pay, holidays, how much did it cost, children going to buy something from the tuck shop, how much that cost, how much change can they get, what happens if they save it, what could they buy then. So those normal generalized conversations hopefully do happen on a day-to-day basis. Happens within the playground, it happens at home as well.
Yeah, and it was interesting to read, not just in terms of financial education, although they were very specific about it in financial education, that part of this idea of resequencing the curriculum is to make sure that things are taught in a coherent sense across subjects as well. So I know you were having a conversation earlier about geography and the math skills that you need in geography, or the math skills that you need in DT, or the math skills that you need in science, and making sure that if those skills are required in a subject, financial education included, that it's already been covered in maths. which I think is a joined up way of thinking that maybe one of the best parts to come out of this whole review, potentially.
Yeah, because again, John, it was lovely to read the report and read that maths is going well and everything that's happened in maths. We know there's a lot of really good work going on in maths, don't we? Particularly in the area of mastery. So it's good to read that and you keep doing what you're doing. But if nothing's coming out, and they're saying these similar things about other subjects and how it's important that children have access to all of this wide curriculum and so on. But we also now need to include citizenship and financial aid and sustainability. I think that joined up thinking is going to be really key, isn't it, to making sure that everything does get covered in a cohesive way without being squeezed out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to Becky and Sally and Lisa for joining us to discuss the new publication of the Curriculum and Assessment Review. It feels like we've been waiting for it for a while. We'll be really, really interested to hear your thoughts on it. If you've had a chance to read it, to have a look at it, what's missing, if anything, what were you hoping that might be in there that maybe hasn't been mentioned yet? The government response to the review suggests that there is going to be wide consultation with teachers into what the new curriculum looks like. And that's why it's going to take a couple of years to shape. So let's start that now. Be great to hear what you'd like to see in a new maths curriculum. You can drop us an email at primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk. It's Twinkle without an E, of course, or get in touch by sending us a message on pretty much any of the social media platforms. Becky and myself will be back on Friday with an Aftermaths episode, and we'll be back next Monday as well with another interview. Thanks for joining us.